Mark had never been this excited in his life. After months of texting, video calls, and late-night conversations with his 22-year-old online girlfriend, he was finally going to meet her in person. He couldn't believe it was happening. The distance of thousands of miles between them seemed insignificant now. What had started as an innocent online relationship had grown into something more. Something real, or at least that's what he believed. He had flown all the way from his quiet hometown to Texas, the state where she lived. The anticipation was almost unbearable. They had shared so much over the past year. Intimate details, their hopes, their dreams, everything. She was everything he had wanted in a partner. Kind, funny, intelligent, and beautiful. He had seen her face on video calls and everything seemed perfect. As his plane touched down in Texas, Mark's excitement grew. He couldn't wait to finally hold her in his arms, to see her up close and make their relationship real. His mind raced with all the things he planned to say and do when they met. It felt like the beginning of something special, something that would last. He had never imagined that his life would be altered forever the moment he stepped into that hotel room. When he opened the door to meet her, what he saw completely shattered the image he had built of her. What had he been expecting? What was it about her that made him feel so uneasy? The moment his eyes met hers, his heart dropped. Standing before him was the girl he thought he knew. But there was something different. Something he hadn't prepared himself for. Mark's mind couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. She was beautiful, but this was not what he had imagined. Mark had met Claire on an online dating platform a year ago. She had been different from the others, genuine, sincere, and most importantly, patient with him. At first, their conversations were casual, like any new relationship. They talked about movies, books, and the little details of their day-to-day lives. But over time, they grew closer. They shared their fears, their goals, their secrets. It felt natural, easy. Every conversation seemed to strengthen their bond, despite the miles between them. Mark had always been a private person, not someone who easily opened up, but there was something about Claire that made him feel comfortable. He found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone before. His dreams of a better future, his struggles with loneliness, and his hopes for love. She listened, always supportive, always encouraging him to keep going. She would send him pictures of her life in Texas, photos of sunsets, family dinners, and selfies with her dog. She often called herself the girl next door, with a radiant smile and a sense of humor that made him laugh even when he didn't feel like it. Her words were always filled with warmth, and Mark couldn't help but feel like he had found something rare, something real. Their relationship had become more serious, though still primarily digital. Mark had tried to visit before, but life always seemed to get in the way: work, money, and timing. But this time he had made it happen. He was determined to make it work, to see Claire face to face and make the connection he had only experienced through a screen tangible. He had done his research, checked her social media, and seen the same beautiful woman he had fallen for in their conversations. Everything seemed to align. There were no red flags, nothing to hint that Claire was anything but what she presented herself to be. She had even talked about her dreams, her plans, the life she wanted to share with someone special. Someone like him. Now, after months of anticipation, Mark was about to finally meet the woman he thought he knew so well. But nothing could have prepared him for what would unfold when he opened that hotel room door. Mark had always been a quiet, introspective man. At 28, he found himself caught in a cycle of routine. A job he didn't love, a life he felt was more about surviving than truly living. The online world had offered him an escape, a place where he could control his narrative and connect with people on his own terms. He had always been shy in person, but online he was someone different. More confident, more expressive. And that's where he met Claire, someone who seemed to understand him in a way no one else ever had. Claire, on the other hand, was the polar opposite of Mark. She was outgoing, free-spirited, and full of energy. She had a way of drawing people in, of making them feel comfortable around her. Her friends adored her, and from everything Mark saw, her life appeared to be perfect, successful, happy, and surrounded by love. She had been upfront from the beginning about her past, her struggles, and her ambitions. She didn't hold back, and Mark admired that about her. But despite her outward confidence, there were layers to Claire that Mark didn't fully understand. As the months passed, Mark began to notice subtle hints of insecurity behind her bright smile. Little things she would say or moments of hesitation during their calls. At first, he brushed them off, assuming it was just her being modest. But deep down, he began to sense that there was something more, something hidden beneath the surface that she wasn't ready to share. Claire had always been careful about her past relationships. Mark knew that she had been hurt before, and he respected her boundaries, giving her the space she needed. They had talked about meeting before, but Claire had always put it off, saying it wasn't the right time, or that she needed to get her life in order first. Mark, though frustrated at times, understood. He believed in their connection, in the bond they had built over long nights of sharing their dreams and vulnerabilities. When he finally made the decision to travel to Texas, he was filled with anticipation. He saw this trip as a turning point, a chance to see where their relationship could go. This wasn't just about meeting her face to face, it was about taking the next step in a relationship that felt different from all the others. He had imagined this moment for months, walking into a room, taking her in his arms, and feeling the connection they shared in person. But the moment he saw her in that hotel room, everything shifted. The woman standing before him was not the Claire he had spent countless hours getting to know. She was still beautiful, still the woman he had fallen for, but something was different. Something he wasn't prepared for. Mark's flight had been uneventful, a blur of impatience and anticipation. He could hardly sit still, the excitement in his chest making it impossible to relax. As the plane descended toward Texas, his thoughts raced. Would Claire look as beautiful in person as she did on video? Would the connection they had built through texts and calls translate into something real? Every minute felt like an hour, and he found himself anxiously checking the time, watching the clouds pass beneath him as the excitement built. He had spent hours preparing for this moment, choosing the right clothes, rehearsing his words, picturing the perfect first meeting. He imagined Claire waiting for him at the hotel lobby, her eyes lighting up when she saw him, just like the scene in a romance movie. In his mind, everything was perfect. Their relationship, which had been so strong online, would be even stronger in person. This was the start of something that was meant to last forever. He was convinced of it. When Mark finally arrived at the airport, he grabbed his bag, his hands shaking slightly from the rush of adrenaline. The heat of the Texas sun hit him as he stepped out of the terminal, and he quickly scanned the area for Claire. His heart pounded as he pulled out his phone to text her, telling her he had arrived. The message was simple: "I'm here. I can't wait to see you." He hit send and immediately began to pace. His nerves were starting to get the best of him. What if she didn't feel the same in person? What if something had changed? His mind ran wild with these questions as he stood outside the airport, watching people rush by. Minutes later, his phone buzzed. It was Claire. "I'm in the lobby, Mark. Come meet me." The words sent a shock of excitement through him. This was it. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and began walking toward the hotel. He had imagined this moment so many times, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. As he stepped into the hotel lobby, his eyes scanned the room. There she was, standing near the reception desk, looking just like the woman in the photos but somehow different. Mark's breath caught in his throat. She was taller than he had imagined, with long dark hair that cascaded down her back. She was wearing a simple sundress, and her smile seemed to light up the room. She was even more beautiful in person than he had expected. Claire's eyes locked with his as he approached. For a moment they just stood there, staring at each other, the weight of the moment hanging between them. And then she smiled, warm, inviting, the smile that Mark had come to associate with her. His heart skipped a beat. "Mark," she said, her voice filled with warmth and excitement. "I can't believe you're finally here." Without thinking, he pulled her into a hug, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight. The feeling of her in his arms was everything he had imagined and more. He could feel her breath against his chest, her body soft against his. He wanted this moment to last forever. "I'm so happy to see you," Mark said, pulling back slightly to look at her face. Claire's smile faltered for just a second, but it was so brief that Mark almost didn't notice. "Me too," she replied, her voice soft, almost nervous. Mark noticed her unease but didn't think much of it. After all, this was a big moment for both of them. He was sure she was just as nervous as he was. They both had been building up to this day for months, after all. "Let's go up to my room," Claire suggested, a hint of excitement returning to her voice. "We have a lot to talk about." Mark nodded eagerly, following her to the elevator. His mind was buzzing with all the things he wanted to say, the questions he wanted to ask. This was the beginning of something real, something lasting. Or so he thought. As they reached the hotel room, Claire unlocked the door and stepped inside, motioning for him to follow. Mark walked in behind her, his excitement growing again, his anticipation building. But as the door clicked shut behind him, something felt off. The air in the room seemed thicker, heavier. Mark couldn't place it, but it was as though the excitement that had been so palpable moments before had started to shift. "Here we are," Claire said, turning to face him. She smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. Mark stood in the middle of the room, his heart racing. Little did he know, everything was about to change. Mark's eyes scanned the room, taking in the sterile, quiet space. It was a hotel room, nothing special, but still, this was the moment he had been waiting for. Claire had told him they would have time to talk, to get to know each other even better in person. But there was a tension in the air now, a subtle unease that Mark couldn't shake off. He watched as Claire closed the door behind them, her movements slow, deliberate. There was something different about her, something that Mark couldn't quite put his finger on. He thought he saw a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, but it was gone so quickly he questioned if he had imagined it. So, Mark began, trying to ease the growing tension. "This is crazy, huh? I can't believe we're finally together." Claire smiled, but it wasn't the warm, open smile he had seen so many times on video. It was tight, forced. "Yeah, it's crazy," she said, her voice a little too quiet. There was an awkward silence as Claire walked over to the bed and sat down. Mark stood by the window, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind was spinning. What was going on? Then Claire's voice broke through his thoughts. "Mark, there's something I need to tell you." Her tone was serious, and for the first time Mark felt a flicker of doubt. He turned to face her, his stomach sinking. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tight with sudden concern. Claire took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she brushed her hair behind her ear. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a strange mix of sadness and apprehension. "I've been meaning to tell you for a long time," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "But I never knew how." Mark's confusion deepened. "Tell me what?" "Claire, what's going on? You're freaking me out here." Claire stood up slowly, her eyes locked on his as though trying to gauge his reaction. She seemed to hesitate for a moment, her body language closed off, before finally speaking again. I wasn't honest with you, Mark. There's something about me, something I've been hiding. I need you to understand before we go any further." Mark's mind raced. What could she possibly be hiding? What could be so important that it would cause her to act like this? "Claire, you're scaring me. Just tell me." She took a deep breath and slowly unbuttoned her sundress, her hands trembling slightly as she did so. Mark's heart raced. He couldn't understand why she was undressing in front of him. Was this some sort of joke? His mind was racing with a million questions, none of which made sense. Then, as Claire revealed what was hidden beneath, Mark's blood ran cold. His eyes locked onto her, the shock hitting him like a physical blow. Standing before him was the woman he had fallen for, the woman who had shared her dreams, her fears, and her love with him for months. But now there was something he wasn't prepared for, something that completely shattered the image he had built of her. Claire had a penis. It took a few seconds for Mark's brain to process what he was seeing. His mind struggled to comprehend the truth before him. The woman who had spoken so lovingly, so sincerely, was not the person he had imagined her to be. This wasn't what he had signed up for. The reality of the moment hit him like a freight train. Claire stood there, her face flushed with shame, waiting for his reaction. Mark could hardly breathe, his chest tightening as panic and confusion flooded his mind. "Why didn't you tell me?" he gasped, his voice a mixture of anger, disbelief, and betrayal. Claire's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't know how. I never wanted you to see me like this." Mark's heart was pounding, the shock of it all consuming him. He couldn't process what was happening. His entire world felt like it was unraveling before his eyes. The room seemed to spin around Mark as he stood there, his mind racing to comprehend what he had just seen. The woman he had shared so many intimate conversations with, the one who had made him feel like he wasn't alone, was standing in front of him, vulnerable and exposed. But everything about her was different now. What he had imagined, what he had trusted, was no longer the truth. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His throat was dry, his hands shaking, his mind struggling to keep up with the chaos in front of him. Claire stood there, her eyes wide with fear, waiting for him to react. Her hands wrung together, as though she was bracing for the impact of whatever he would say next. "I didn't mean to shock you," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible, a fragile edge to it. "Mark, please. I need you to understand. I didn't want to keep this from you, but I was afraid of how you'd react." Mark felt his chest tighten. Afraid? She had been hiding this from him for months, building a relationship on lies and omissions, and now she expected him to understand? The anger was building inside him now, the confusion starting to give way to frustration and hurt. "You lied to me, Claire. For months you hid who you really are, and you expect me to just understand." Claire's eyes filled with tears and she took a tentative step forward. "I didn't want to lie, Mark. I just wanted to be happy. I wanted to be loved, and I thought maybe, just maybe, if you got to know me, The real me, not just this, not just the physical part of me that maybe you'd accept me. But I was wrong. I should have told you sooner. Mark's stomach churned. His thoughts were racing, but they didn't make sense. He wanted to be angry, he wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt him, but there was something inside him that wanted to listen, to understand her. His own confusion and fear made it impossible to know what to do next. I've been honest with you, he said, his voice growing louder. I've shared everything about myself, and now you're telling me this? This is how you've been hiding yourself from me? Claire flinched as if he had struck her. I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid you wouldn't want me, that you'd think I was wrong. Mark's anger was beginning to dissipate, replaced by something else. He couldn't deny that he still cared for her, but this truth was too much to process. Too much to reconcile with the woman he had fallen in love with. He wasn't sure what he felt anymore, betrayal, confusion, or even empathy. But the idea of the woman he had trusted, the person he thought he knew, now standing before him in this way, was more than he could bear. He turned away, pacing to the window, his fingers trembling. I don't know what to say, Claire. This isn't what I thought we were. Claire's voice trembled as she spoke, her emotions raw. Mark, I'm still the same person. Please, I didn't change. I still want to be with you. But Mark's mind was reeling. His heart felt like it was being pulled in two directions. He loved her, but everything about their relationship now felt distorted. How could he continue with this? How could he look past everything that had been hidden from him? He couldn't shake the sense of betrayal that gnawed at him, the sense of being manipulated. And as he turned back to face Claire, the pain was evident in his eyes. I need time, he muttered, his voice hollow. I can't do this right now. Claire stood frozen, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had expected anger, but not this coldness, this emptiness that now hung in the room between them. Mark felt his heart shatter as he looked at her, but his feelings were overwhelmed by confusion. He couldn't see a way forward, not now. Not with the walls that had suddenly sprung up between them. He had come here with hope, with the belief that this relationship was real. Now, all he felt was the weight of everything he hadn't known about the woman he thought he loved. The silence in the room grew unbearable, each second stretching out like an eternity. Claire stood across from Mark, her face streaked with tears, her body tense and uncertain. Mark, his heart pounding, couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Everything about the moment felt like a collision of two worlds that would never fit together. The life he had imagined with Claire, the life he thought they had been shattered in the blink of an eye. Mark's mind was a whirlwind. He had come here for love, for a connection, for something real. But now, standing in front of him was the woman he thought he knew. Yet, she wasn't who she claimed to be. The shock, the anger, and the betrayal churned within him like a storm he couldn't control. His breath was ragged, and his hands were shaking as he gripped the edge of the dresser, trying to steady himself. Claire's sobs echoed in the small room, and with every sound, his own anger surged higher. The lie, the deception, the months of manipulation, it all came flooding back to him. Why? Mark finally asked, his voice low and hollow, the question echoing in the air between them. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide this from me? Claire shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I thought you'd leave me. I thought you'd never accept me. Mark didn't know how to respond. He wanted to yell at her, tell her how badly she had hurt him, how everything felt like a betrayal. But instead, he felt the familiar weight of anger begin to bubble up, a rage he hadn't known he was capable of. It wasn't just what she had done, it was the lies, the manipulation, the careful concealment of something that had been so vital to their relationship. Without thinking, Mark spun around, his eyes wide with fury. His voice cracked as he shouted, You've lied to me for months, Claire. Everything we had, it was built on lies. And you expect me to just accept this? To forgive you? Claire took a hesitant step back, her eyes wide with fear. Mark, please, But Mark didn't hear her anymore. The room seemed to close in around him. His vision blurred with anger and confusion, his breath coming in short, frantic bursts. He couldn't control the rising tide of emotion inside him. He reached out, knocking a lamp off the side table, the crash of it against the floor breaking the fragile quiet between them. Mark took another step toward her, his mind clouded by rage, the world around him fading into a blur. He didn't know what he was doing. His body moved on its own, driven by the tidal wave of betrayal and confusion that drowned every other thought in his mind. I can't take this anymore, he shouted, his voice trembling. You ruined everything. And then, in an instant, the storm inside him overtook his body. His hand shot out, grabbing Claire by the arm, his grip tightening as her eyes widened in shock. "Mark, please?" Claire cried out, her voice broken with fear. But it was too late. In the haze of rage and confusion, Mark acted without thinking. His hand shot out once more, and in a flash of violent emotion, the truth of the moment hit him like a sledgehammer. Claire fell to the ground, her body crumpling as the blood stained the floor beneath her. Mark stood over her, his breath ragged, his body frozen in the aftermath of what he had just done. The silence returned, only this time, it was deafening. Claire's life had ended in an instant, and Mark was left standing in the ruins of his own making. His chest heaved with the weight of what he had done. His mind couldn't process it, couldn't understand the horror of what had just occurred. The woman he had come to love was gone, and he was the one who had taken her life. For a long moment, Mark simply stood there numb. Then, slowly, the reality of the situation began to seep into his mind. He had killed her. He had killed the woman he had traveled halfway across the country to meet. And in the hollow quiet of the room, Mark realized there was no going back. Mark stood there, his mind a chaotic blur of emotions: rage, disbelief, guilt. He looked down at Claire's motionless body, the blood seeping into the carpet beneath her. The weight of what he had done crushed him. The violent outburst that had once felt so justified, so righteous, now felt like an alien force that had taken over him. There was no coming back from this. His chest heaved with every breath, his heart pounding in his ears as he slowly backed away, not able to take his eyes off the scene before him. What had he done? The question echoed in his mind, but it had no answer. It was as though the very air in the room had become heavy with guilt, the stillness pressing down on him with the suffocating realization of his actions. Mark's legs gave out beneath him and he collapsed onto the bed, his hands trembling as he buried his face in his palms. His mind was still reeling from the confrontation. The shock of seeing Claire's truth, the truth he had never been prepared for, had left him spiraling. His rage had clouded his judgment, and now the horrible truth settled into his bones. He had killed her. He hadn't even meant to. It had all happened so fast. The anger, the confusion, the betrayal, everything had boiled over and he hadn't been able to stop himself. His chest constricted in panic as the gravity of his actions crashed down on him. The reality of the situation was far worse than anything he had imagined. Claire's life was gone and it was because of him. He could feel the walls closing in around him, the crushing weight of the guilt pushing him into an abyss from which there would be no escape. What now? Mark didn't have the answer. The only thing he knew for sure was that there was no going back. His life as he knew it was over, and the world would soon know what he had done. Mark sat motionless in the dimly lit room, the silence around him almost suffocating. His mind was a tangled mess of conflicting emotions: regret, guilt, disbelief. He had no idea how much time had passed since the incident, but it felt like an eternity. His hands still shook, his body numb, as though he was detached from the reality of what had just transpired. Claire's life, gone in a moment of madness, of rage, of confusion. The woman he had traveled so far to meet, the woman he had thought he loved, was dead. He had destroyed everything he had ever wanted, all because of a moment of blind anger. His mind kept replaying the events, the confrontation, the way everything had spiraled so quickly. If only he had stayed calm. If only he had understood, been patient, been more forgiving. But it was too late for that. The damage was done. And now he was left with the aftermath of his actions, an irreversible tragedy that could never be undone. Mark closed his eyes, trying to push away the haunting image of Claire's lifeless body. He had been consumed by his own rage, blinded by the betrayal he felt, unable to see past his own anger. In the end, it had all been a lie: his love for her, his expectations, everything. It wasn't real. He thought about what Claire had said, how she had just wanted to be loved, to be accepted. He had been so caught up in his own hurt, his own shock, that he hadn't even considered her feelings, her fears. As the minutes ticked by, Mark realized that his life would never be the same. He had crossed a line that no one could return from. He would carry the weight of this decision with him for the rest of his life. And the worst part was there was no one to blame but himself.